Un saludo para todos, es un gusto recibirlos aquí en este quinto encuentro anual BIM Uruguay, este año bajo la premisa BIM más digitalización de la construcción. Nos complace muchísimo contarles que este encuentro, este evento ha sido denominado y nombrado como de interés nacional por parte del Ministerio de Transporte y Obras Públicas de Uruguay. El encuentro se desarrolla, como ustedes saben, en forma virtual. Nos estamos viendo a la distancia, pero además nosotros estamos hoy en un lugar físico que es el Cowork Latam, aquí en la sede del Parque Rodó en Boulevard España 2253, Montevideo, Uruguay. Los organizadores de este quinto encuentro BIM, Cámara de la Construcción del Uruguay, Corporación Nacional para el Desarrollo. Coorganizan Uruguay 21 y BIM Forum Uruguay. Patrocinadores, Cámara Uruguaya de Servicios de Arquitectura e Ingeniería, BIM Forum Latam, Embajada Británica de Montevideo. Apoyo en difusión, Connect Américas, plataforma del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. También queremos saludar especialmente a nuestros sponsors, Sonda Autodesk, Graphisoft Archicad, Estudio S, CSI Ingenieros, AK Software, Cadit, KPN Trimble, Scanning, Espacio AIC, Ingener, Stiller, Ciemsa. Participan además las empresas de los keynote speakers que darán las conferencias en los 2 días de encuentro. BIM 6D, Know Your Net, 360 Smart Minds, Coninsa, PropTech, Building Smart Spain, René Lagos Engineers, Edilicia, Link Constructions Argentina, Buró Japol, MSI Studio. Queremos resaltar que el encuentro BIM se trata de una reunión, como ustedes saben, 100% virtual que desde el año pasado adquirió un giro y un carácter internacional por contar con keynote speakers de diferentes países. Vamos a contarles rápidamente los objetivos de este encuentro. Es instalar el concepto de digitalización, transformación digital en la construcción y de la importancia del proceso BIM como un nuevo proceso de generando un nuevo paradigma para la construcción. Dar continuidad también al proceso de promoción y uso de BIM como metodología de trabajo en la construcción, incorporando herramientas, metodologías complementarias que ganan cada vez más relevancia en el sector y permiten desarrollar mucho mejor las labores. Esto genera también relación entre BIM y la sustentabilidad, ofrecer perspectivas locales e internacionales de qué es lo que está pasando con la metodología y brindar un espacio institucional a organizaciones, organismos que trabajan en esta línea, tanto en nuestro país como en el exterior. Queremos dejarle también una información relevante para lo que va a ser este encuentro de los 2 días. Se refiere a nuestra plataforma. Dispondremos del servicio de acceso fácil, una compañía de software que da soporte a la transmisión. Se trata de una plataforma virtual que tiene una serie de funcionalidades que podrán ser aprovechadas por los participantes de este encuentro. Por ejemplo, en la recepción contiene información útil para los participantes, anuncios que hayan que hacer, algunas modificaciones, etc. Después está a la izquierda de la pantalla la función Stage o escenario, donde se estarán llevando adelante todas estas transmisiones que ustedes van a disfrutar y de las cuales van a participar. También está la función Session, que estará habilitada únicamente para la primera conferencia del evento, es decir, en unos minutitos nada más, cuando recibamos a May Winfield, que será en inglés y para lo cual hay traductor, aquellos que quieran utilizar ese servicio de traducción. Después tenemos también la función Expo. Allí encontrarán los stands virtuales montados por empresas de sponsors que nos acompañan en este encuentro. Podrán conocer las empresas, obtener promociones, manifestar interés también por recibir información de los temas que a ustedes les interesen más, funcionamientos de equipo, servicios, etc. Todo eso va a estar allí en la función Expo. Y por último, en la de Networking, que se trata de un espacio donde los participantes pueden interactuar ya sea determinando con quién quieren conversar, entablar un diálogo, negociaciones, etcétera, o si no, en una forma random que también está esa posibilidad. Continuando, tenemos el gusto de recibir ahora al presidente de la Cámara de la Construcción del Uruguay, ingeniero Diego O'Neill. ¿Estás por allí? Buenos días.
Muy buenos días,
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo está? Lo escuchamos.
muchas gracias. En nombre de la Cámara de Construcción del Uruguay, darle la bienvenida a todos los participantes de este quinto encuentro anual sobre BIM y digitalización en la construcción. Saludar a la Corporación Nacional para el Desarrollo, con quien coorganizamos este encuentro y con quien venimos trabajando hace años en esta temática, entre otras. También a los coorganizadores de Uruguay 21 y Bienvenida Uruguay, a los patronizadores, a los sponsors, a quienes ya no se nombraron en la introducción. Este es un encuentro bien relevante, bien importante para nosotros. El año pasado nos vimos forzados por la pandemia a hacerlo en forma virtual. Este año se podría haber pensado en alguna modalidad híbrida o algo así, pero en realidad, si bien la virtualidad se pierden algunas cosas, como puede ser para los encuentros personales y demás, también nos permite otras que son muy valiosas para este tipo de actividades, como es contar con speakers de muy distintas partes del mundo, de altísima calificación, lo cual le da un valor agregado muy importante, pero además le da un carácter internacional porque tenemos más de 700 participantes, donde obviamente hay un número importante de gente de nuestro país, del Uruguay, pero también hay gente de toda América Latina, de más de 13 países de América Latina y el Caribe, de Estados Unidos, de España, del Reino Unido, de Francia, en fin. Hay una veintena de países de los que hay participantes en este encuentro y eso le da un carácter internacional que lo permite esta modalidad virtual. El encuentro, ya se habló más o menos de los objetivos también en la introducción respecto de la importancia de la digitalización en la industria y la contribución de BIM en ello, además del impulso del uso de BIM, seguir impulsando el uso de BIM como metodología y también desde una perspectiva de la construcción sostenible. Todo esto y más serán las temáticas que en la mañana presentarán los keynote speakers, para en la tarde dejar las conferencias más a cargo de los sponsors. Para la Cámara de la Construcción del Uruguay, el impulso al BIM y todas sus aplicaciones es de una importancia estratégica. La construcción es una cadena de procesos y BIM tiene... ¿Cómo que no se escucha?
Ahora sí.
La construcción es una cadena de procesos y BIM tiene impacto en la mejora de la eficiencia y la productividad en todas las fases, la fase de diseño, en la planificación, en la construcción y en la conservación. Y la construcción es una industria que las mejoras de la productividad son muy lentas comparativamente con otras actividades. Entonces, todo esto para nosotros es de gran valor, es una metodología que impulsamos, que nos parece esencial para lo que viene por delante, y estamos muy contentos de tener este quinto encuentro, que ya es un evento en la agenda de toda la gente que está en el tema, año a año, y que esperamos seguir impulsando. Y nada, desearles que sea muy fructífero y que lo puedan aprovechar todos y que deje mucho resultado para la industria en su conjunto. Muchas gracias.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias a Diego O'Neill, presidente de la Cámara de la Construcción del Uruguay. Vamos a recibir ahora a Mauricio Rodríguez, gerente de arquitectura de la Corporación Nacional para el Desarrollo, CND, que también queremos escuchar su visión al respecto.
Hola, muy buenos días. Es un gusto para mí darles la bienvenida en representación del directorio de la CND a estas dos jornadas de trabajo y puesta a punto en relación al uso de la metodología BIM. Hace ya 5 años que junto con la Cámara de la Construcción hemos emprendido este desafío de organizar el Encuentro Nacional BIM. CND, en su rol de gerenciadores de obra, ha incorporado la digitalización en sus procesos de gestión de obra con muy buenos resultados mejorando los plazos, costos y calidad de nuestras obras. Y esas son las razones que nos motivan también a ser parte de la organización de este evento ya desde hace 5 años, como decía. Por eso estamos hoy aquí y por eso también venimos apoyando al sector público a emprender este camino. En este sentido, comentarles que desde el año pasado se creó un grupo de trabajo a nivel del Estado y se ha elaborado un pliego base para licitaciones BIM, para el uso de todas las organizaciones públicas. La CND ha participado en este equipo aportando su experiencia en llamados con requerimientos BIM que hemos venido realizando en los últimos años. Como decía, estamos apoyando con procesos de implementación de BIM en organismos públicos. Ayer justamente firmamos un convenio con la Agencia Nacional de Vivienda, por el cual los vamos a apoyar junto con el BID en la implementación BIM para un proyecto piloto. Seguramente el presidente de la agencia hará mención a este tema. Estamos terminando un proyecto piloto CAIF en estos días, en el barrio Aeroparque, en Canelones, para INAU, que nos va a permitir sacar conclusiones acerca de cómo mejorar nuestras obras. Sobre este proyecto expondremos el día de mañana con mayor profundidad. Desde CND hemos apoyado el desarrollo de proyectos pilotos en estos últimos años en fases de diseño, construcción y también mantenimiento. Y en este encuentro, junto a la Cámara, hemos acercado expositores locales e internacionales, recién lo hacía mención el presidente de la Cámara de la Construcción, con experiencias en todas estas etapas. En particular, estos últimos 2 años, el hecho de hacer este evento de forma virtual nos ha permitido acercar expositores internacionales, lo cual, bueno, estamos muy contentos en ese aspecto también. Lo mencionaba también O'Neill, el BIM en la industria de la construcción es una realidad que facilita la estandarización de los procesos constructivos, contribuye a reducción de desperdicios, menores plazos y fundamentalmente reduce imprevistos en obra, lo cual redunda en menores costos. Espero que les sea de utilidad este evento y que también aprovechen de las instancias de intercambio que están previstas para la tarde. Nuevamente les doy la bienvenida en nombre del directorio de la CND y muchas gracias por su participación.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias a Mauricio Rodríguez, representante de la Corporación Nacional para el Desarrollo. Importante apoyo para este encuentro BIM y todos los anteriores que hemos tenido también. Recién se mencionaba a la Agencia Nacional de Vivienda. Bueno, vamos a escuchar justamente al presidente de la Agencia Nacional de Vivienda, Klaus Mill von Metzen. Lo tenemos por aquí en contacto con nosotros y queríamos escuchar también su opinión sobre la metodología BIM y lo que espera de este encuentro. Adelante.
Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un gusto poder participar desde la Agencia Nacional de Vivienda. Saludar al ingeniero O'Neill, saludar al arquitecto Rodríguez de CND y a todos los presentes, a los organizadores, BIM Forum y Uruguay 21, en este quinto encuentro anual que realizan. La ANB, es un gusto poder participar con ustedes. La ANB está llevando adelante, como saben, una serie de actividades con el objetivo de la mejora en la gestión. Entonces, en ese sentido particularmente, el objetivo es impulsar el desarrollo mediante la transformación digital, en particular con el uso del BIM. Y desde que asumimos el año pasado, en el 2020, venimos trabajando en ANB coordinadamente con otras organizaciones públicas, como CND y muchas más, que entienden la necesidad de mejorar los procesos a través de las metodologías basadas en datos. La industria de la construcción es una industria que está comenzando a entender la mejora de la digitalización y sin dudas a un ritmo muy distinto de otras que sí tienen procesos digitales y de mecanizaciones muy avanzadas. La construcción en Uruguay emplea cerca del 8% de la población y representa el 10% del Producto Interno Bruto. Entonces el Estado debería ser y es el principal inversor en obras de infraestructura y de edificación, impulsor además y cliente e interesado en las mejoras de las industrias AECO, arquitectura, ingeniería, construcción y operación. Nosotros en el 2020 nos sumamos los esfuerzos con otras dependencias del Estado y conformamos un grupo, como mencionaba Mauricio, perdón, en el cual el grupo interinstitucional con el Comité Nacional BIM, también al BIM GovLatam. Por eso es importante que trabajemos con un único objetivo, con un criterio común de implementación, y en esta instancia de alguna manera nos sirve para entender que la estrategia que tiene que venir del gobierno tiene que venir desde el gobierno y por eso ser acompañado por el privado. Los países más desarrollados, por ejemplo, como Reino Unido, Finlandia, Noruega, Países Bajos, hace muchos años que vienen desarrollando a nivel del Estado el BIM, y ellos tienen implementado un manual europeo, el Task Group, que es la organización BIM de los países europeos, espejos del BIM GovLatam. También, por eso mismo, ellos establecen un beneficio, por ejemplo, por el uso del BIM en un 10% en la fase de ejecución. O sea, esas metodologías empiezan a generarse a través del gobierno y empezar a generar una cadena que empieza a generar esos desarrollos. Por eso los invitamos a sumarse al trabajo que las organizaciones públicas estamos realizando en mejora de todos los procesos digitales. Como decía Mauricio, arquitecto de la CND, firmamos ayer un importante convenio para ANB justamente para la realización de estos talleres y empezar a trabajar en conjunto con expertos del BID en la mejora de la implementación de nuestros procesos. Justamente, la idea es llevar adelante un primer proyecto piloto, muy posible de que se pueda realizar en vivienda de interés social en Uruguay bajo la metodología BIM, muy cercanamente en el tiempo. También la posibilidad de que a medida que se empieza a desarrollar, bueno, empezar a ingresar los proyectos de ley de vivienda promovida que puedan ser ingresados de forma digital, en forma de metodologías, la metodología BIM. Entonces, en ese sentido venimos trabajando y creo que es muy importante este proceso que la ANB tiene que acompañar y va a acompañar de aquí en más. Así que bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación y les deseo unas buenas jornadas en todo lo que tiene que ver con este encuentro anual BIM. Muchas gracias por la participación.
A ti también, muchísimas gracias por esos buenos deseos, así será, estamos trabajando para ello, todo un gran equipo aquí desde hace varios meses para que este quinto encuentro BIM sea todo un éxito. Gracias entonces a Klaus Milfon-Metzen del Ministerio de Vivienda de nuestro país. Muchas gracias a todos, como les decíamos, los que nos acompañaron en esta presentación un poco más formal, pero también queremos resaltar dónde nos encontramos, en Cowork Latam, que ofrece beneficios a los participantes del quinto encuentro anual BIM más Digitalización de la Construcción Uruguay 2021, les ofrece los siguientes beneficios. 3 días gratis para conocer en puestos flex, 20% de descuento para los clientes que quieran cerrar una membresía en el mes de octubre 2021. El beneficio no solo sería para la sede en Uruguay, sino también para aquellas sedes en Santiago de Chile, Medellín y Miami. Para acceder al beneficio deberán enviar un correo a contacto@coworklatam.com colocando en el asunto Cowork y Encuentro BIM. Así que ya saben todos aquellos que quieran aprovechar este beneficio. Vamos a recordar a quienes hacen posible todo este encuentro, a nuestros sponsors, Sonda Autodesk, Graphisoft, Archicad, Estudio S, CSI Ingenieros, AK Software, Cadit, KPN Trimble, Scanning, Espacio AIC, Ingener, Stiller, Ciemsa. Participan además las empresas de los keynote speakers, BIM 6D, Non-Euronet, 360 Smart Mind, Coninsa, PropTech, Building Smart Spain, René Lagos Engineers, Edilicia, Link Constructions Argentina, Buró Japol y MSI Studio. Justamente vamos a continuación a comenzar con las exposiciones. Tenemos, por ejemplo, nuestra keynote speaker en unos minutos, pero antes quiero recordarle algo, que en el espacio Sessions va a haber traducción porque la conferencia va a ser en inglés. Aquellos que quieran utilizar el servicio de traducción lo pueden hacer a través de la landing page allí en Session. Les cuento que May Winfield es la directora global de riesgos comerciales, legales y digitales de la firma internacional de ingeniería Buró Japol. May es abogada senior de la construcción con más de 16 años de experiencia y es reconocida como una especialista legal líder en BIM y tecnologías de la construcción. Es embajadora de la Alianza BIM del Reino Unido, cofundadora y presidenta de BIM for Legal y miembro de varios grupos que buscan apoyar a la industria en el progreso e implementación de la tecnología digital. Con ustedes entonces, May Winfield, cuya presentación tiene que ver con BIM y digitalización, las barreras y las oportunidades. Please be welcome. We are hearing you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, you should be able to see my slides. My name is May Winfield. I'm the Global Director of Commercial, Legal and Digital Risk at Happold. I'm a senior construction lawyer and a specialist in BIM and construction technology. I've been specializing in BIM maybe about 11 years, and I've spoken about this worldwide and written various documents on it. For those of you who haven't heard of Happold, you've probably heard of some of our projects, including the Museum of the Future and the big waterfall in Singapore Changi Airport. We really focus on technology, including BIM. One of the things that may be of interest is the BOM, which is an open source computational project aimed at overcoming interoperability issues, so issues when parties are using different types of software. And you can find out more about that on that link there. And it can be used, we use it for the platform to create different types of technology, such as the Lifecycle Assessment Toolkit, which enables designers to assess carbon on early models, whether they're Rhino, Revit, or Table in Excel, so you can make more sustainable design and having less environmental impact. So thinking about the topic at hand, which is digitization and BIM, one thing to, I suppose, to start with is that we're living in unprecedented times. And whilst we have had lots and lots of challenges in all aspects of our lives, we've had a real acceleration in the adoption of technology. Digitization and digitalization have gone from a nice to have to a must have. But what do these terms mean? Put simply, digitization means converting information into digital format. And digitalization, there's no consistent meaning, but it really means using digital technologies to make communications and business more digital. So both are really important, and they both make things faster, more secure, cheaper, and more practical, particularly in the global world we live in. There's also, now we're going from BIM and digital. BIM is becoming business as usual and quite normal, hopefully, in our industry. We're now moving on to what happens next. And the next thing that people are talking about is the metaverse. And what is the metaverse? And you'll see there's a definition which says that the metaverse is an expansive network of persistent, real-time rendered 3D worlds and simulations. And that sounds maybe a quite complicated definition. Facebook has a simpler definition, and they just say it's a set of virtual spaces where you can create and explore with other people who aren't in the same physical space as you. The idea is that you have a combination of real world and AR, VR. And Facebook thinks so seriously of this. They've hired 10,000 workers in Europe over the next 5 years to build a metaverse, combining virtual and augmented reality, so AR technologies in a new online realm. And this may remind you of Second Life before, and it's something like that, but it's even greater. And people are expecting it to be used both in the construction and other industries. So we can, for example, work within a BIM model in an AR and VR environment. Thinking about BIM and other digital technologies that in which we use BIM models, let's first remind ourselves why BIM is important. BIM, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, increases efficiency and reduces costs by early clash detection. You have fewer on-site variations. You have more collaborative working, which means you have better design decision-making. You have fewer disputes because you are having fewer disagreements between each other. You also have better design understanding because you have easier visualization. You can check whether design is feasible rather than getting to site and finding there's a problem. You can discuss better on how the different consultants' designs work together. But now we're finding that BIM can work with different types of technology, and they supplement and enable us to use BIM in a much greater way. And there's lots of opportunities. So let's look at a few of those. One being blockchain and smart contracts. And the first thing to say is blockchain is not the same as Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a use of blockchain. And I don't have the time to go through the meaning of blockchain, but suffice to say, it enables you to securely put together a series of information, and people can't change those once they've been connected together. This provides certainty, and because you can't change it, the computer code lacks the uncertainty and the ambiguity of people writing contracts. It's much faster because it's not slowed down by people processing documentation. You upload the information and it's there. You don't have to do anything else. It's also cheaper for that reason, and it's there's more autonomy because you're not waiting for your lawyers, you're not waiting for various different people to look at the information, to upload it, to read it. However, it is obviously still reliant on people putting the correct information up in the first place. And it's often used now to upload BIM models. So you have the different sets of BIM models connected together. So you can see how your BIM model has progressed over time and who's made changes. There's then modular construction, design for manufacturing, assembly, modern methods of construction. And all of those words really mean a broad range of off-site manufacturing. So you're creating things in a factory to come onto site to build your building or your asset. There's a significant cost saving to that. There's a lot of savings in terms of sustainability. There's a lot of articles now saying you can save tens of thousands of tons of CO2 because you're not having so much transport taking materials back and forth to site. You can also have different sections of the asset being worked on simultaneously. So you imagine a construction site, you can put things in whilst other things are being built in a factory. You don't have to wait for one thing to finish and then the other. You then have drones, which a lot of you will, I'm sure, be familiar with. And drones enable you to do a survey of a site very quickly. It can go to dangerous, hard to reach areas. and then pull that information directly into the BIM model. So you don't have someone manually going to site, looking at something, then going back to their computer and typing it in. Again, it's a lot faster. You recall I mentioned smart contracts. For those of you who haven't heard this term before, Wikipedia defines it as a computer protocol intended to facilitate, verify, or enforce negotiating performance of a contract. And they say people claim that you can use it to partially or fully execute or enforce contractual clauses. But that's already happening now. The financial sector is using smart contracts. There's a lot of tests and pilot projects using smart contracts in the construction industry in terms of payment. So you don't have to wait for someone to push the button to look at something, to ensure that materials get ordered, reordered when they need to. But to thinking about smart contracts, just a practical definition to take away, which I quite like, is that of a vending machine. So a lot of people in the blockchain industry say a smart contract is like a vending machine. You push a button and then you get the packet of green M&Ms, even if you change your mind halfway through. You can't change what happens once the transaction has started, and a smart contract works much the same way. Thinking of other technologies, there's 3D printing. And 3D printing, you can feed in a model into the printer and it will print the design. And this 3D printing, when you look what's made possible, you can have really, really innovative design. Again, you can construct different elements simultaneously. You don't have to do one and then wait for the other. You don't have to store materials on site. So you save money in that way and save time. Look, there's also robotics and AI machine learning, which are becoming very integrated part of using BIM. And you use AI and machine learning to analyze the BIM models. You might have seen Spot the Dog, this robot in the shape of a dog, which goes around the site, does a survey, and then feeds it into the model, and all that information is uploaded. There's also VR and AR, which people often use with BIM models. It's easy to understand and communicate. I know one project team who have their project meetings in the BIM model using VR headsets. So it's easy to explain to a client about the design when they can just point to it because it's very visual. And finally, there's digital twins. Now, digital twin is a digital representation of a physical asset. So some people call it BIM plus. So imagine a BIM model with all the detail of the asset. So you imagine the heating system, the cooling system, the pipe work, all the different things. This enables people to test, if I change the cooling system or the heating system, will I save money? Will the project be more efficient? And will I be able to have it more sustainable? And digital twins is now a very big topic worldwide. Las Vegas has announced that it wants to be a digital twin city. So all the main buildings will have a digital twin, so a virtual representation, and you have a full information, so you can make the city function better. To give you an example of other digital twins and the uses, this is a digital twin toolkit that Barahapo created, which enables real world data to be fed into the model to enable the client to understand what choices are being made by their tenants, how can they make things more sustainable. And the value in these sorts of digital twin and these sorts of electronic and digital toolkits is that the speed of understanding and the assessment of real-time outcomes, you have better collaboration and engagement from your client because they can see in a way they can understand. And it looks like this, and you'll see from this that it's a visual medium that people who are not very technical can understand rather than lots of facts and figures and a traditional type of model. Having talked about all those technologies which use BIM, What do they all have in common? Well, one being their reliable source of truth. You have digital information all written down. You can see where it came from, when it gets changed, when it was input. It's much faster. It's not slowed down by people input processing documents. You have, for example, you have clash detection, which is done by a computer, and it's much faster than doing it manually. It's more efficient because you have less risk of errors as people do manual analysis or manual checking of a site. It's much easier to use globally because you're doing things across the computer, across a digital environment. It's much more secure. You have these sorts of technologies are hack resistant. You have passwords to ensure only the people who should be accessing it do access it. If you have someone who has been fired or who's no longer, whose contract's terminated, you can simply withdraw their access from the information from your cloud platform, wherever you're storing your data. And so you can keep a much tighter hold to this precious information. And there's a lot more precision and detail. There's a lot more information that's available. And therefore, it's a better communication tool to your client, to the other people in the project team, to explain your design, to explain what you mean. So you don't find later on the client said, well, I thought it would be something different. And you realize there's been a miscommunication as to what your intentions were, what your design. And there's a real data-rich record to enable you to change the design more easily, to progress the works on site. And finally, an audit trail. If something does go wrong, you can go back to the information, to the models, to the data, and see where did this go wrong? Who did that change that caused the problem? And BIM models and all these sorts of data, blockchain, are being used in disputes so that to show the court, to show the judge, or to show the other party what you mean and why you're saying something happened at a certain time. So having talked about technology, I'm now going to talk a bit about the legal issues and the contractual issues. But it's technology. Why am I bothering to do that? Well, at the beginning of a project, it's like a big love affair. If anything goes wrong, obviously, you're just going to talk about it. You're going to discuss it very helpfully and very calmly. But when things do go wrong, it looks more like this. And then you go back to what was agreed. Your client or the other side is saying, well, you promised to do this, or you said I could do that. And you have that disagreement. And when you look at your records, they probably look less like this and more like this. Over the years of being a lawyer, there's been so many times when I've gone through boxes and boxes of documents trying to understand what parties agreed. But when you have electronic information, when you have the models, you have the electronic data, it's so easy to locate the detail you want. It's easy to search. It's secure. And that's why, as I said, a lot of it is now being used in disputes. However, it's headlines like this that make people a bit scared to use digital data. However, nothing should stop people from becoming more digital. The risks can be overcome, but they shouldn't be ignored, because then you will, the loss of money and the risk will obviously get rid of the benefits of using digital. You need to think about the risks and deal with it. So what are some of the common risks from a legal and contractual perspective? One of them is just the lack of standardization of language. So if you say BIM, if you ask 100 people in the world, what does BIM mean? What does a BIM model mean? Every single person has a different understanding. Every different person will say something different. So if your contract says, give me some BIM models, give me some Revit files, no one actually will agree what that means. You should explain, you should agree what is my deliverables, what am I actually doing? So that when you say an apple, you know everyone else knows you mean an apple as well. And there's lots of real life examples. These are some I've encountered over the many years of dealing with BIM and digital, One being just, you say, do some BIM, just do some stuff for me. There's also achieve level 3 BIM in accordance with ISO 19650. There's a problem with this because the ISO 19650, which is the new BIM international standard, which is used across the world, does not have this expression levels. Levels comes from an old UK standard. So saying achieve level 3 actually means nothing at all. And you could have a disagreement because what you think it means and what the other party thinks it means is very different. In some ways, saying, I want some BIM, or I want a digital model, or I want you to use drones, it's kind of like saying a unicorn. No one's actually seen one, but everyone's convinced they know what one looks like. And so when you talk about any sort of digital medium, using any digital process, using BIM models, you can't just say use BIM. It's clear as mud. You need to set out in the documentation, agree, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing. And so there's no gaps. Over the years, the problems I've seen happen is where there's uncertainty, where it's not clear who should do what. And in that regard, look at what documents set out all your BIM process, your digital data, and you will find that you need to be careful that all the BIM information, the digital documents form part of the contract. There's so many times when all your great BIM documents, your BIM data, aren't mentioned in a contract, or the documents which are attached to your contract may be completely different. Most lawyers don't understand BIM, don't understand digital. That's not necessarily their job. You will probably have to tell them, these are the BIM documents, these are the BIM issues, please deal with this in a contract. And at the end of this, I give you some links which will provide your lawyers, which will provide the people writing your documents some information, some handy tips on what they should be asking you. The next one is, what does the client actually want? Probably the client doesn't know how to ask for the scope. They've read about BIM, they've read about drones, they've read about 3D printing. They think, great idea, but they don't know how to explain the scope to you. And if it's not clear, it's worth asking. Years ago, I saw tender with 2 pages of BIM deliverables. And we asked the client, do you really want this? It seems over the top and too much for the project. And the client says, I don't know what any of it means. I hired a BIM consultant to write it for me. Just tell me how much it costs. And so it's worth considering asking, what does a client want? So you don't get to the end of the project and have a client very disappointed because what was in their head isn't actually what the documentation meant. There's also copyright. With all of these types of technologies, including BIM, you have a lot of new types of product. For example, in a BIM model, you have the objects, you have the data within the model, you have the new data you can produce, and you also have the models themselves. Where your copyright for each of these sits may be different. And it's worth thinking, which part of this do I want to keep ownership of? Is there some templates or coding I want to use again for different projects? You can't assume that your contract will set this out again because your lawyer probably doesn't know that a BIM model has objects in it. Do the objects belong to the manufacturers? So you must make sure you're not promising to give the copyright to your client, because if you are, you're breaching your contract the moment you sign it. There's also process and data. Ultimately, digital is all about process and all about data. And there's issues of software and hardware. What software are all the team using? There are real issues of interoperability. So if different people are using different types of software, the model or the data may look different, and you have to prepare for that. There's issues of version control. So if you have different versions of Revit, you may not be able to open up your files. And it's worth talking about that, because who is responsible otherwise if there's a delay or there's additional cost because different people are using different software, or someone doesn't have hardware enough to open up the models or open up the digital data. There's also things about process and like file naming, format, all the content of the models. You need to standardize this, because if you're all doing different things, who pays for your additional time, additional money to try and interpret, try and understand what you get from other people? And there's also obviously always the possibility of human and computer error. You're not likely to be able to claim against the computer, the software company for any software issues. So you have to deal with that with all the other parties. What happens if, what sort of checks can we do to avoid these sorts of things happening that we'll notice if it does? There's also new roles and duties. With the introduction of BIM and digital, there's so many new names for different roles: BIM lead, digital lead, BIM manager, BIM information manager. None of these have any special meaning. If your contract just says you are now the BIM lead, what do you actually have to do? Do you have to do clash detection? Do you have to tell people what to do? It's worth setting out completely and talking to your insurers. Is it okay that I'm taking on this new type of role? There's also new civil and potentially civil and contractual liabilities. So to give you an example, in using drones, if you are using a drone on a site, there's potential claim for trespassing next to a neighboring site. What if something falls off the drone and hurts someone, damages property? Is it clear who's responsible for that? Who pays for that? Is who's responsible for making sure all the data that comes from the models, that comes from the drones, that is fed into the 3D printer, that's accurate? What if it's not? Is it clear who takes responsibility for that? And finally, insurance. Insurance is very important if something goes wrong. And are you confident that everyone has the right insurance? Do people have cyber insurance? Are people covered if they lose the data, if they are handling various types of information? And it's worth asking that question. You can't just assume, because it's such a new environment. And there are various new forms of insurance, for example, for modular construction, to allow for the fact that the buildings are being constructed in a new way. So just very quickly, some potential risks of this, dealing with each of the types of digital data I mentioned. So blockchain and smart contracts, thinking about all those risks I mentioned, you could have computer bugs, you can have whether the actual code reflects what the parties mean. There's complications, which I don't have time to go into, about deleting information from the blockchain. So if you have a variation, if a party did get terminated, can you remove the information from the blockchain? May or may not be possible, and it's worth thinking before you use a digital type of tool like this, whether it's actually the right one for you. Think about modular, the different types of data between the designer and the manufacturer. Or if the designer gives the model to the manufacturer says, I can't use this, it's useless, it's the wrong format. Whose fault is that? Is the design even capable of manufacture? And what happens if there's a variation halfway through? They have to change it, they have to remanufacture. Do you have to, who is responsible for that? You then have drones. What happens if the data gets corrupted from the drone when it's feeding it into the model? Again, who is responsible for making sure that doesn't happen or taking reasonable compliance steps? With drones, there's so many regulations and laws to follow, and it's worth thinking, checking that the people who are the drone operators, the people responsible for it, making sure that they have all that's necessary. And I mentioned about things like trespassing, and there's also personal data. A lot of countries, such as the UK, have very strict regulations about personal data. And if a drone accidentally takes footage of someone not involved in the site, could there be a breach in regulation? And it's worth thinking about that. And then thinking about 3D printing, again, you could have loss and corruption of data from the model feeding into the printer. Is the design even capable of printing? And copyright of the various elements, the template, the actual product. Is it going to last? Have you promised it's going to last 20 years? And with robotics, You have, again, things like copyright, how the AI interprets the data, and making sure that it interprets it in the way you mean. With VR and AR, you could have risk of how the computer interprets what's been uploaded onto the VR headset, and delays because say the VR headset can't read the model that you've uploaded. All of these things can be overcome by making it clear in your contract who should be responsible for having process to minimize the risk, such as insurance or just records. Other common obstacles include things like cost. People are often scared to do digital because they say it's going to be very expensive. And there is an initial cost, but I think there's so much data and there's so much proof now about how much you can save, and you can get a lot of this on the internet, that there's significant cost saving using BIM and using the various digital products and tools to convince the right people to invest. There's software and hardware. Choose the right software, choose the right hardware. There's so many different ones available, and it depends on what you want to use it for. And there's mindset. We, as a construction industry, we're not very forward thinking. We're not necessarily very fast in being innovative. And we have to sometimes convince everyone that it's the best way to be. And just briefly, overcoming or mitigating the risk. You will recall I mentioned about having contract terms clear, and look at the contract. Does it deal with all the possible things that could go wrong? Are all your BIM or the digital documents either in the contract, or you've actually happy that they're not binding, that people aren't forced to comply with them? Making sure that there's internal processes, there's internal records and training. Everyone knows what's happening, everyone's doing it the same way. Look at available guidance and applicable laws. There's a lot of help out there now to do things right and getting the right insurance in case something goes wrong. In terms of BIM, I'd recommend having a look at the guidance on the UK BIM framework website. It has various guidance on complying with the new international standard, but also the guidance contains various templates for your commonly used BIM documents like the TIDP, the MIDP, and so forth, the BEP. And it's useful, particularly if you're first starting out in BIM, or even if you're quite advanced. And ultimately, if you're trying to minimize your risk and trying as much as possible not to get into trouble, start with a blank sheet of paper and list, here are all the things that could realistically go wrong. Okay, now I'm going to say who should deal with that risk, or how it's going to be dealt with. Is it by records? Is it by insurance? Is it by, because we're going to use a particular way of working, so this isn't going to be a problem? And then list all of those and make sure that's recorded in your contract or in your agreement discussions with parties, so that it's likely those things won't go wrong. And finally, I thought this was a very good quote. The CTO of Ethereum, which is one of the cryptocurrencies, said the potential to alter aspects of society is of significant magnitude. And this is something that would provide a technical basis for all sorts of social changes. And I find that exciting. And I think this really applies to all aspects of BIM and digital, and all the real amazing opportunities we have to push forward our industry in a really big and exciting way. I've put up some links there about further reading about the various topics I've talked about, such as digital twins and a metaverse and drones, and which I hope you'll find useful. And if you have any questions, do send me an email or drop me a message on Twitter, and be more than happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, muy amable por esta presentación. Ha sido un gusto recibirla aquí en este quinto encuentro anual BIM. Así que muy amable, muchas gracias.